So I've been playing a bit of Battlefield 4 and jumping back onto a game that in my opinion is one of the best Battlefield games in the franchise. Some people think Battlefield 3 is the best, Bad Company 2, others really love Battlefield 1. A very small minority think BF5 is the best, but most people who I play with recognise Battlefield 4 as one of the best Battlefields that has ever been made. Yes, it was full of its own bugs and problems and lots of quirky little things that made it quite an individual experience compared to some of the other Battlefield games, but overall it had something for everybody, and it really ticked a lot of boxes when it comes to that open world sandbox Battlefield experience, especially with modes such as Conquest. Now this video is going to take a closer look at the vehicles in Battlefield 4 and really try and work out where things went wrong, or at the very least changed for DICE. Recent Battlefield games like BF1 and BF5 haven't really brought that vehicle gameplay that we are really expecting with a Battlefield game, and it's quite obvious in some cases why that is, but in others I can't really get my head around it. Yes, you have to consider the setting, and DICE are limited with what they can include in a World War I or even a World War II setting. However, there are other things that have come in, such as animations and these self-repair from inside the tanks and all sorts of changes that have come to the vehicle experience, and in all honesty haven't really improved it for the most part. There are some changes that are positive, and we'll get onto that in a bit, but overall I think there is a lot left to be desired and DICE have a lot of work to do for the next game. So as I mentioned before, there's still fun to be had in Battlefield 4, there's a lot of life left in the game, and I would definitely suggest that you make the most of the next year or so before the next Battlefield game comes out. Go back and try some of the older Battlefields. BF4 does a lot of stuff correctly, and there are still quite a few people online. You can get yourself a game fairly easily and experience some of the stuff that you can see in the background right now. The game's super cheap, and although I would like to give away a load of keys, I think for the couple of pounds that you have to pay for them on sites such as Instant Gaming, a quick plug there, but you can find a link to Battlefield in the description below, super cheap, it's definitely worth checking out. We haven't seen that modern setting since Battlefield 4, so you're going to be really hard pressed to get a game that gives you access to attack jets and MBTs and LAVs and all sorts of other modern military equipment. And that does beg the question why it has taken DICE so long to choose to go back to a modern setting, assuming that's what they're doing in the first place. Everyone has pretty much decided that the next game is going to be probably Bad Company 3, and although I don't know for certain, I would say that that is a very high possibility. That being said, it doesn't necessarily have to be in a modern setting. They could do some sort of spin-off or something slightly unexpected, which wouldn't be unusual for DICE, but let's assume that they are going back to a modern setting. That's a long time since the last modern Battlefield. Battlefield 4 came out at the back end of 2013. That's a whole lot of time before the next game's coming out, 7 years almost, which some people would argue is a bit too long. There are many things in Battlefield 4 that I enjoy doing in vehicles, and some of that can be seen in the background. I think the main word that I would use to describe the vehicle gameplay in BF4 is variety. There is so much you can do, whether it be TV missiles or tow missiles from an attack boat on some of the Naval Strike maps, or Paracel Storm possibly, or maybe you're in an LAV on some of the Final Stand maps, tow missiling attack helicopters out of the sky. Even if you're not really that good at that sort of stuff, you can still drive around, capture objectives and hold down positions in a vehicle, and many people do think that there are just too many vehicles in Battlefield 4, which is a fair criticism to give the game, but I think it does a great job at trying to be that open sandbox experience where everyone can get access to something and just join in on this giant large-scale battle. One of my all-time favourite vehicles in the franchise is the attack helicopter, and the reason for this is, well, there's a couple of reasons for it. Firstly, I think it's awesome. I think attack helicopters are really awesome vehicles in real life. They're pretty cool in Battlefield 4, and the way that the game designers have brought in all of the sound design and the visuals, I just think it's really, really awesome. The attack helicopters handle a little bit differently now than what they used to. They used to be a lot more difficult in the older Battlefields. BF3, it was a bit more of an orbit simulator where you just go as high as possible and the gunner would just shoot things on the ground. In Battlefield 4, you have the best of both worlds. Yes, you can camp at the back of the map and shoot things, but the chances are you'll get killed by a jet or another attack helicopter, whilst if you get a bit more aggressive, as you can see in the background, even if you have a gunner like me who is missing most of his shots, you can still be quite effective, and it's very high risk, high reward. On maps such as Dragon Valley, which is a great map for this sort of stuff, a very vehicle focused map, you can have a lot of fun. The cover is limited, but if you know certain positions, you'll be getting a lot of kills and avoiding a lot of the lock-ons. The second reason I love the attack helicopter is the team-based gameplay. You have a pilot and you have a gunner, and whilst you can fly an attack helicopter alone, you are much more effective with a gunner alongside you. Seat switching is a possibility, so if you're flying without a gunner, you can jump in the gunner seat and operate that as well, but you're at a disadvantage, and an enemy attack chopper with 2 players in will probably take you down unless you're extremely skilled. You've also got the option of tactics when it comes to 2 players, so maybe one will focus on a lock while the other one focuses on a different target. This makes you far more formidable in the air than somebody who doesn't have that team base between them and they're not communicating. I love that sort of stuff, and I feel as if that's one of the main things that has disappeared in Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5, and DICE would do good to go back and have a look at that and really work out how to implement it into the next Battlefield game. Now, there are a few things with vehicles in Battlefield 4 that I do think are a bit of a problem. The TV bugs with the attack helicopters, thermal is very, very strong and could really be something that they look to have as a trade-up. So if you have thermal, you lose a countermeasure, or maybe thermal is very limited to within 10 meters, something like that. I also think that having the resupply that we have in Battlefield 5 would be very good for the attack helicopters on maps such as Shanghai or Dawnbreaker, so they're always having to go back to base to resupply as opposed to being out in the field and just dominating an entire match, and this would help balance the game. Something else that I'm not a massive fan of, and this has been hot debate in the community recently, and that's animations. I can see both sides of the arguments. Firstly, you don't want people bailing out of vehicles. You want to get the kills, and if someone's bailing out of a jet instantly, as soon as you start shooting them, you'll explode the jet, you'll get the vehicle kill, but you won't get the kill on the player. Now, there are several ways around this. Instead of having an animation that leads you to get basically stuck in the vehicle and then die as you're jumping out, and a couple of ways around it, well, I'm sure DICE will work something out, but the way I think they should go down is keeping the instant eject, because it leads to far more only of Battlefield moments, and it's just far more satisfying to play with instant animations as opposed to the long ones. But secondly, you should be punished from bailing from your vehicle. So possibly an explosion radius increased on the user as soon as they jump out, so you get punished if you're trying to run away from a tank that's just about to explode, or maybe some sort of penalty where the guy that's shooting you will get a reward and then you will not lose points but be unable to get a vehicle for another couple of minutes or something like that if you choose to bail out of it. There are different ways around this to penalise the person who's bailing out and reward the person who's doing the shooting, as opposed to just punishing everybody with these longer animations. The in-house repair system, I'm not a fan of it either. I think the fact that in Battlefield 3 and 4 you had to get out of your tank, and this goes hand in hand with the animations, but you get out of your tank, or your gunner would get out of your tank and repair you. In Battlefield 3 you had the certain parts of the tank with the reactive armour that needed repairing, and that was far more tactical and involved a lot more strategy. In Battlefield 1 and 5, yes, you can repair tanks if you've got the repair tool or the wrench, but it's not really the same thing. In all honesty, tankers will be sitting at the back of the map next to a resupply station, quick repairing and taking advantage of being at range against infantry targets. Overall, I would say that is a big step down in vehicle gameplay, and that is why a lot of people dislike tanking in Battlefield 5, or at the very least dislike tankers. They're not too much of a fan of getting killed by camping tanks, and I'm certainly not either. When it comes to ricochets and angles and this sort of stuff, when it comes to tanking in Battlefield 5, I'm not a fan of it. I'm not too sure what they were trying to go for, but there's nothing more frustrating than shooting a tank. You think you're getting a direct hit and you just get a deflection or some sort of small damage output from your Panzerfaust or Piat, and I'm really not too sure why this is. DICE had a perfectly good system in Battlefield 4 where if you shoot the back of a tank you get an immobilization on them, and you'll also do a whole lot of damage, 49 or 50 in total. That left the tanker in a situation where he had to get out and repair, use a countermeasure, or possibly bail the tank. If you had a gunner, they could repair. And depending on what tank you had, you might not be able to turn the turret around and shoot the person behind you. For example, the Abrams was too large at the back, so if you turn your turret around, a enemy player could sneak underneath the turret and you wouldn't be able to hit them. You're immobilized, so you can't reverse over them either. This gave the game a lot more variety and a skill base that needed to be worked around. Whilst in Battlefield 5, I'm just getting hit by stuff, I don't know what's happening. Yes, I can reduce angles and hide behind cover, but for the most part, the effective tactic is to stay away from anything that's exploding or kill stuff quickly enough so they can't actually shoot you. The variety is something I mentioned earlier. Think back to how much stuff you had in Battlefield 4. You could take an attack boat with a multitude of loadouts. You could then customize it any way you wanted with different paint schemes. And whilst it wasn't that extensive, it was fun and easy to do. That's just the attack boats. You could take an AA and there were different AA vehicles for each team. Tanks. 3 different tanks for the 3 different factions, and these could be customized extensively with the sort of weaponry you take. You could move on to the LAVs, again different for different factions, tow missiles, lock-ons, the gunner had all sorts of stuff they could attach as well. You then looked at things like the Amtraks and transport vehicles. You could move on to things in the air with the attack jets, stealth jets, and attack helicopter and transport helicopter. This is a lot more than what you get in Battlefield 5, and whilst they are limited by a World War II scenario, I wouldn't say that DICE have done a fantastic job with bringing lots of different stuff to the table. The planes are fairly similar, yes there's a couple of different things here and there, but for the most part the plane gameplay is quite boring and lackluster. I'm not a massive fan of it, and for the tanking, well, that's the worst it's been in a Battlefield game since, well, ever, in my opinion. Bringing back some more of that variety, customization, and options when it comes to what you actually want to take in a Battlefield game, which is supposed to be all-out war, is what DICE need to consider for the next game. Finally, one more thing to take a look at, and again I suppose it's linked to the setting, and DICE are limited with what they can do in BF1 and BF5, but I think speed and mobility is something that has been lost in Battlefield games when it comes to vehicles. Jets are incredibly quick in Battlefield 4 and you're punished for not doing things at a certain speed. If you're choosing to fly a jet slowly, you're an easy target. The same could be said for Battlefield 5 with some of the planes, but they aren't really as quick. Targets are easier to hit from the sky, and the game moves at a slower pace. The same goes for the tanks. Yes, you could say a couple of the others, like the Staghound, are fairly fast, but it's not really the same as Battlefield 4, where tanks and LAVs can nip around the map, are very vulnerable to enemies shooting you, but also can lay down a lot of fire. This was quite a nice way to do it. I feel as if you're vulnerable but fast, and if you're skilled enough, you can get yourself a load of kills, whilst in Battlefield 5 it's very samey. The skill floor is very low. It's very easy to get in the game, and the skill ceiling is also incredibly low as well. There's not much to learn before you become very good at it. So what do you think of the vehicles in Battlefield 4? Do you think DICE really peaked with it? Do you think it was a sweet spot for vehicle gameplay in the Battlefield franchise, or do you think that things have maybe got better with Battlefield 1 and 5? Maybe you're of that opinion. I mean, it's completely up to you. Personally, I think that things have gone downhill quite significantly since BF4, but I do hope and do have a feeling that things will turn around when the next game comes out. Let me know in the comments. I'm interested to see what you have to say, and I'll catch you in the next video.